Hello, today I'm going to talk about do-it-yourself snail garden ornament, stained glass style. Now, to make this snail that I have out in my garden, I started off with this snail metal shape that I got at a local Goodwill. Now, I don't know what people would normally use this for, but I decided it needed an upgrade and an addition of a lot of glass orbs and other pieces and some LED lights to make it into a fun item. So I wanted to have some little antennas on my snails, and I used some copper wire and kind of wrapped copper wire into antenna type little protrusions out the top of my snail to start out with. Then I wrapped those wire protrusions with 7/32 inch copper foil, the same copper foil that you use in like this pile of copper glass. These are glass globs. They're like flattened marbles. They're sometimes called dragon eyes, flat marbles, globs. They're called all different things. And I have a variety of sizes and colors of these globs that I have foiled. As you can see, I foiled my whole metal snail that I got. Now, the reason why I foil the whole thing is most metal sculpture type things that you buy are created with some kind of metal alloy that solder will not stick to. So if you wrap them with copper foil, then you won't have that problem and you'll be able to solder away and have things solder nicely. At the bottom there is a piece of wire that I put across, and basically I wanted an area at the base of it to be able to put my LED lights in. So that's what that wire was, kind of as an indication of where I'm going to stop putting my glass globs. Now, when I wrap these particular glass globs, I used a very thin piece of foil, like only half the width of my 7/32 inch foil. Lately, I've been starting to use a little bit wider because the trouble with, and you'll see this later in this video, the trouble with using a very thin piece of foil is that it really doesn't wrap around your glass very much, and thus it doesn't create a nice grip. Because basically what's holding your glass into your project is the solder. And if the solder doesn't wrap around the glass, then you're only having the stickiness of the foil to hold your foil and your solder and your glass all together. And it looks better to have a very thin line because then you don't have that really wide outline around your globs, but you then don't have much strength to it. And I did have to add strength here and there to help compensate for that. So the other way, if you don't want to have to add wires and other things to help compensate for the lack of strength, you might want to use a little bit wider piece of foil, the whole width of your standard 7/32 inch foil. But basically, I wanted to have a bunch of different sizes and shapes and colors of globs to put on my snail. And right now, I'm just basically tacking them together. And the gaps in between them, I'll either use smaller pieces of glass, or I'll put just some solder in those gaps, or I'll put some foil and some solder. And I also will show you later where I actually put pieces of cut copper in those gaps to help fill those gaps. Because I wanted to have this whole snail to be completely enclosed so that when it's lit up, there's no cracks between the different pieces of glass. So yeah, there are some times when I make projects like this, I will leave purposeful like gaps between them, and the light will just shine right through them. But obviously when you do that, the light's going to want to shine through the gaps a lot more than the dense glass globs. So it's just the look is going to be different. As you saw a moment ago, I am soldering the inside and the outside of my project, and this is to help hold it together more, because it's not going to be strong if I just solder on the outside, the face that's going to be visible when I'm finished. So when I can, I go inside of it and I solder on the inside. I'm also using some silicone gloves right now. Now, if you wear gloves when you are soldering, you will help keep the flux and everything else off your hands, which makes it a lot cleaner and safer to use. And also the heat will be somewhat dissipated with, especially with the silicone gloves, because silicone's a great product to use for doing stained glass work, because the solder doesn't stick to it. And silicone is somewhat heat resistant, so it'll help your fingers not burn. So as you can see, I'm going all the way around it. I'm actually adding solder to the basic armature also as I'm going along. Right now I am adding solder to those antennas that I put on it, because those are not going to have any glass on them. They're just going to have solder on the foil. And the reason why I'm putting solder on everything is I'm not going to leave this thing silver colored. I'm going to patina it in either a copper or black when I'm done. So I want to make sure that it all is pretty much the same color when I'm finished. If I didn't put solder on areas and then I decided to put black patina on it, then I would end up with the copper foil and then the black patina on everything that was soldered. So if that's not something you want, then you're going to have to cover everything with solder. Now, if you want to use a copper patina when you're done, which is what I ended up with this project actually, then you don't really have to cover all the copper with the copper foil with solder, because the copper foil color is pretty much the same as the copper patina. It'll blend a little bit better if you solder it all, but that's really up to you. I also feel that it's probably stronger to just put solder on everything, because this thing's going to need some strength to it. These glass globs are, of course, very heavy. So the whole project when it's done is very heavy. So I needed to have as much strength as possible, because I didn't want it to be falling apart on me. You can see how when I'm back soldering there that at times I'm actually filling in the gaps between those little glass globs and the wire swirl. You can see right now that most of the snail part, the shell part, has its basic pieces of glass on it now. Now I am putting some of the glass on the neck part, the orange part of my creation. And I'm using sheet glass for that. So basically I cut a whole bunch of orange sheet glass in strips, all the same width. And now I foiled one and then soldered it on, and then I laid another piece where I want it to go, and then I'm using a Sharpie marker, just a normal Sharpie marker, and I'm marking where I think the next one should be. Now it's not going to be perfect. And at times when I cut these pieces, I had to adjust these pieces because they might not be exactly right because the marker is so thick. So each time I cut one, I then would check and make sure it fit. And if I had to adjust it, I would then do so. And then I would foil it and solder that one in and then do yet the next one in line. I had two slightly different tones of orange that I used for this neck area of my snail, as you've noticed. So I just went back and forth between the two colors. So there was a slight bit of variety. They were the same type of glass, pretty much just flat glass without any extra weird textures or anything. And it just made for a little bit of a variety. So when I was cutting these pieces of glass, since it's just flat, straight cuts, I use a handheld glass cutter. I didn't use my ring saw or anything fancy because, you know, they're just flat cuts. Sometimes, yes, I did have to put them on my grinding wheel because I had to make it a slight bit smaller, adjust it slightly. Remember I said I wanted to end up having no gaps in the glass. So I wanted to fill in all the gaps between the pieces of glass. So I wanted no gaps in this area too. So I tried to make the seams completely flush so that I wouldn't have to worry about filling in any gaps. When you're making three-dimensional sculptures like this, as opposed to a flat stained glass piece of work, you really can't predict every piece ahead of time. So you pretty much have to design and cut the pieces as you go. I mean, yeah, in your mind and maybe even on paper, you have an idea of what you want, but you're going to have to adjust it as needed because you're working with, you know, different planes, and it is three-dimensional. I'm using your standard 60/40 tin lid solder for this project. You can see I've added a lot more pieces of the flat glass, and now I am putting some parts in the head part of my snail. Again, I have to put it one piece in at a time because I never know exactly how it's going to go in until after I get one in, and then I use paper often to make my next pattern for my next piece. So even though this metal sculpture that I got from Goodwill is pretty much symmetrical, I am not going to cut one piece for one side and then one for the other side because it might not fit exactly. So I will just work on one side and then go work on the other side. Now, at times you may have drops of solder go on the inside of your project as you're working. You want to knock those off before you solder it in such a way that you can't get your a fit or something inside of your project to get that glob of solder off, because those will show once it's lit up. You'll see these little strings or globs of solder that might have clung to the inside of your project. So I'm kind of like pressing down where the inside of the frame is, and using my Sharpie marker to draw out what the pattern might look like. And then I'm making sure that it actually fits. And if I need to, I will make little adjustments here and there, and then try it again and again, whatever it takes. Sometimes I have to start over completely because it just isn't going to work. So sometimes I've made a whole pattern and then I'm like, that's not good enough, and then I start all over again. And yeah, sometimes when I cut the glass, after I've gotten to this point, I then go, yeah, it's not good enough for me, and I redo it. Yeah, there's a little bit of a gap, as you can see at the bottom right there. It would be best if I didn't have that little gap, but because I'm going to have so many gaps in the shell of this snail, so many areas are going to be inconsistent in the thickness between the pieces. I'm not really going to worry about a little bit in this area because you know, it's minimal compared to what the body of the snail is. You can see that some of the glass fell out as I was working. I don't know if you saw that in the picture, but as I said, my theory of using very thin lines of copper foil around the glass was very attractive, but it made for having very weak connections. And since these globs are so heavy, and I had to keep rolling this project over and over and over while I was working with it, some of the glass did fall out. So right now I am reinforcing an area with a piece of copper foil. Copper wire. So this is 14 gauge copper wire. It's pretty strong, but still bendable, and I can make like a little loop of housing for this, and that will be a little bit stronger than the original space it was in, and that wire will help with the strength of that area. I'm still adding more pieces of glass to the other side of the snail. Now you would think with all those piles of glass that I showed you at the beginning of the video that I wouldn't have problems with finding the right size glass, but yeah, I did, even though I have so many globs of different sizes ranging from about 10 millimeters up to about 1.25 inches diameter. There still were times when I just did not have the right color that I wanted, and I went back and ordered more sizes. The traditional size for glass globs is about 3/4 inch in diameter. So that's like your normal size. You can also get it often in 1/2 inch, and then you can also get it in the 1 inch or 1.25 inch diameter. But the easiest size that you can get in a variety of colors will be your 3/4 inch. Now this is flat copper, just a flat piece of copper sheeting that I am cutting into a variety of pieces. I just use regular scissors, and now I'm like flattening them because like they were very curly. Once I cut them with my scissors, they kind of curled up. Now this sheeting that I bought is sticky on one side and not on the other. So when I was soldering them in place, the sticky side tended to curl up. So sometimes I just like took that sticky side off. I didn't really care if it was there because I'm going to actually use the non-sticky side. I'm going to use that out, you know, visible to my finished look. And I'm soldering these triangles and squares that I'm cutting in place, and they're going to help fill the gaps. So I'm not trying to fill these gaps with just solder or with just a piece of wire. So you can see, yeah, there's another area where I need to put a new piece of glass in because it fell out. So using a piece of flat copper will give a little bit of strength to it, and it will also kind of act as a backdrop to my solder so that I can fill in that gap. I didn't really want it to look like I added a piece of flat copper, so I did have to add solder on it to try to blend it in. The smaller areas around these, the smaller globs, were very easy to fill in with just solder. I could kind of like bridge the gap with just kind of floating a piece of solder between one and the other without much ado. So if I add solder around the globs so that all the foil has been soldered, and then I just float some solder in the gap between them, ta-da, the gap is now completely filled in, so I don't have to worry about the gap anymore. And here I am trying to flatten out some more pieces of copper. And the reason I tinned this copper before I put it on, it was just easier. If your copper is tinned, then when you go to solder it, it already has a coating of solder on it, and so the solder will stick to it really quickly. Solder sticks to copper pretty darn quickly too, but it'll stick to tinned copper even quicker. You can see that was kind of a four-pointed piece of copper shape that I cut for that one. Now, as with any other stained glass project that you work on, you don't want to overheat one area too much, because especially like if you're doing a project like this where you didn't have really wide foil, if you heat it up too much, your glass glob is just gonna get completely undone from the solder and the foil, and it's just going to fall out. So you got to be careful with that. Sometimes it's hard to find a piece of glass to fit in a spot that you have. So, I mean, yeah, it would have been nice if I could find one just a tad bit bigger than that one, but I couldn't. So that's the one I'm putting there. The globs that you get are not completely a complete circle. They're kind of, well, they're globs. They're kind of irregular. So sometimes you can just kind of spin the one that you found and get it to fit where you'd like it. Because this project is a three-dimensional project, makes it even harder to make the solder connections like really smooth between them. So I'm not really going to worry about that. I am more after the look of the shapes, not the smoothness of the connections between them. So yeah, I kind of go back and forth between one area and another. Of course, I'm always thinking about that. Right now, I'm trying to get any of the wet oils off from cutting my glass before I foil it. You have to clean each piece. I'm constantly thinking about how I'm going to get the lights into my project. Because yeah, that would be bad if I made my whole project and then I couldn't put the LED lights in it that I want to do. So that was a little bit of a challenge to get the lights to go up the neck of the snail. It kind of took a lot of prodding with wire and pliers to get that to happen, but it worked. Now this is my completed snail before I put the patina on it. And now it has the copper patina on it. So the copper patina doesn't come off completely symmetrical all over. There is some variety to the copper tint, but I really like the look that it ended up being. And this is my little snail out in the garden at night. And he's really cute. And thank you for looking at this video. And I hope this inspires you to make some creation of your own. Bye-bye.